What's good, everyone? Evan Jarvis here, and today we are going to be doing a tier list for Heroes of Hold'em. Today we are going to do a tier list for the abilities for the Necromancer. We're going to be ranking the Necro abilities from S tier to D tier. So for a little bit of context, first off, I love the Necro. It's my second favorite class to play in the game behind the Cleric. I think it's got a lot of cool different things working for it. And these rankings are going to teach you how to build your character in a way that has the best chance to succeed in the tough big field tournaments and medium field tournaments. It's not going to cater specifically to the small field tournaments or minion based build, although I will speak to those when they come up because I do have a minion based Necromancer as well. And in terms of my qualifications, I finished in the top 10 of the season leaderboard before in Heroes of Hold'em. I final tabled the massive field zombie horde numerous times, and I've gotten plenty of wins against the highest ranked players in the game, despite the fact that I play nowhere near the amount of volume that they play. So having a good build and knowing how to use it makes a big difference, and it can give you a big advantage. And I hope that with this tier list, it's going to help you build a better hero, get more caches, and ultimately get more wins in the game. One thing we do need to say about the Necro is the unfortunate thing that the main benefits of the Necro are based on Hex in debuffing their opponents. If your opponents have the spells that allow them to cleanse debuffs and they know when to use them, it's going to make it much more difficult for you to win with your Necromancer. That being said, if they use them ineffectively or they don't have the cleansing debuff spells or antidote potions at all, they have almost no shot of beating you if you use your skills in the correct order, which I'm going to talk about in this video. So we're going to go through things alphabetically and let's get into the action. First, we have Animate Dead. Revive the first minion you control that is eliminated with 100% of average health stack. And this one I'm going to put in B tier. If you watch my Cleric abilities ranking video, you know that most of the minion-based skills are going to find their way into the B tier category. If you don't have some of the best abilities, then the minion-based ones are going to be totally fine. If you're going for a minion-based build, then they're going to be solid, but they aren't going to be extremely competitive in the toughest lineups. And for that reason, B tier is always going to be kind of the best that they will make it. I will say if you're using Animate Dead, typically you want to be doing a build with fewer minions and strong ones rather than a bunch of weak ones. You only get one revive and you don't want to use it for, an imp or a succubus that has very minimal health to begin with and is going to die early. You'd rather use it for a dragon that's going to survive for a while and then get revived for a decent amount of health because average health will be bigger later in the game. Next, we have Blight. Flip a coin. If it's heads up, all opponents take 15% of their health pool in damage. If the result is tails, all minions at your table take 30% of their health in damage. I'm going to put this one in D tier. I do see that we're able to ding players for 15% of their health, which isn't bad, or 30% of their minions. So the problem with this is that you want to use it late game because you want to actually, do more meaningful damage. And the deeper you are, the bigger the average stack is, the greater that 15% is going to represent. But the problem is if it comes up tails and you hit minions, good chance all the minions are going to be gone and you're going to do literally no damage. So first off, when you do damage, it's not a huge amount. And secondly, it's possible that you won't get to do any damage at all. And for that reason, I never equipped this and it's going to be D tier in my books. Next, we have Blood Oath. Minions you control gain health equal to 40% of your current health pool, as well as a 5% leech bonus. This is a B tier ability. Honestly, it's almost an A with that extra leech bonus, but I just have a hard time putting anything that's minion based into the A tier or S tier levels. I really like the 40% health bonus, like Bless of Cleric, and it's one you can use strategically. As I said in my other video, I really like waiting until my minions have helped me leech some health or I've won a couple of pots to start the event, such that the 40% heal will be more significant for them. If my Blood Oath, my Bless, whatever, the 40% heal at least doubles up my shortest stack minions, I'm going to consider using it. And if it's doing more, like triple or quadrupling them while doubling my bigger staked minions, I'm definitely going to be using it then. The fact that it also adds a 5% leech bonus is awesome, because you can get to the point where you have 55, 60% leech with some of your characters. And if you happen to use Deal with the Devil to get this ability back, you can get that leech number even higher, and you can go for that second massive heal that, you know, in a small field tournament, you can get to the point where if you were the big stack and your minions were doing all right, and you blood out them for a second time, you may get to the point where you're in first and your minions are second through sixth, and you just have all the chips in the tournament. So really versatile spell. One of the best ones for minion-based builds. B+ tier, what we'll go with for that. Next, we have Cursed Button. For the next 12 hands, whenever a player who possesses the button wins a hand, you leech 35% of that pot. Disabled heads up. And for me, this is going to be an A tier ability. It just kind of sneaks its way in there because of the fact that it can get you so many chips in the end game. It's not such a great spell to use when you're six-handed because of the fact that the odds that that player will on the button is going to win the pot are, you know, 1 in 6, maybe a little bit better than that because the button's going to win more often, but you know what I'm saying. But if you cast this when you're three-handed, just as a default, button's going to win 33, 40% of those pots probably, maybe even 50, and you're getting 35% of that health for free. So any spells that allow you to get free chips without having to commit anything from your own stack are going to be very valuable. And the fact that this lasts 12 hands and can be used on the final table and still works for 12 hands on the final table, whereas most spells are kind of decreased to 3, makes it extremely, extremely, extremely powerful. When you used to be able to use it heads up, it was just straight broken, but fortunately the devs fixed that. It's still an A tier ability for me, and it's kind of one of the last ones that may or may not make it on my character, depending what I think the lineup's going to look like. Next, we have Cursed Goblin Sapper. End of hand, Sapper explodes, dealing 10% of damage, health, and damage. Winning the hand, opponent gets Hex for 6 hands. Hex debuff for 6 hands. This one's going to be a C tier for me. I do think that Hex is the most powerful debuff in the game and just absolutely incredible. But the Necromancer has so many different ways that it can Hex their opponents that I think using an ability which requires us to win the hand for it to activate just isn't that great. And that's why it's going to be a C tier rank for me. Next, we have Deal with the Devil, which is definitely not a C tier ability. Lose 30% of your health to regain one ability of your choice. This is instant S tier ability for me. Regaining abilities, one of the most beneficial things in Heroes of Hold'em. And yes, the 30% tax may sound like it's kind of significant, but when we get into what you can combine this with later on in the tier ranking video, you're going to realize just how insane getting an ability back when you're a Necromancer, an ability of your choice, is. So this is definitely S tier material. Also, you can combine this with other spells that you're going to heal later, or you can get a majority of your chips. Let's say you're planning to go all in, but you need some health back to cast Deal with the Devil. Well, you can just put in 80% of your chips, cast Deal with the Devil on the flop when you have, you know, 20% of your stack left, get the ability back, and then if you win that pot, you just get all the health back as well. So you can kind of play around it, where if you can commit a bunch of your chips, you don't lose 30% of your starting health at the start of the hand. You lose 30% of your health at the time that you cast it. So you can make it seem less expensive than it would otherwise be. And again, just getting abilities back with the Necro is absolutely insane. Next, we have Death Toll. All opponents who lose the current hand's showdown take an additional 10% of the pot in damage. The total damage is added to the next hand's pot pre-flop. I'm gonna throw this one in D tier. I don't really use this one ever. I could see this being useful if it was combined with like a Warrior's Whirlwind, or, you know, Thief's Cut Purse, or a Cleric's Tithe, where people are forced to see the flop and you're getting to play like a 6-way pot. The problem is you have to be pre-flop and under the gun to cast this, which is what those other abilities need to activate. So they'll never happen simultaneously. And everyone knows that Death Toll is activated, so they can just like skip the pot and avoid that 10% negative free roll. So too hard for it to actually hit. So it's going to be a D tier for me. And even when it hits, it's not really that crazy of an ability. Okay, next we have Desecration. Target player has a random non-dragon minion under their control eliminated. You take 50% of their health. I'm going to put this in B because it is a minion-based ability, but it is a very strong minion-based ability. It's different than the other minion-based ones because it's not about you getting minions, it's about you taking away your opponent's minions. But you can just take a bunch of a bunch of health. This is a really good early game spell to increase your stack significantly by taking out an opponent's minion and getting half the health. The downside is you can't target dragons, and those are going to be the ones that have the highest health. So you're really going to be looking for, you know, titans and demons probably. And it does require a little bit of sifting through the lobby. Actually, no, it doesn't require sifting through the lobby. You just need to click on the players that are on your table to see what minions they have. If they have 2 demons, easy game. If they have a titan, easy game. The downside is if they have a titan and a succubus, you got a 50-50 shot to take out the good minion and get a lot of health, and a 50-50 shot to get the weaker minion. So with this spell, if you're playing against a player who's in that kind of situation, you probably want to wait till the weaker minion dies or until the minions have a similar amount of health and then cast it. So it's an early game spell, but not necessarily one you use on hand 1. It really depends on what minions your opponents have. And again, those extra details, those extra complexities, which make it harder to really hit the jackpot, are why it can't really go above B tier. Something that can go above B tier though is Exorcism. Target opponent sits out for 3 hands, gains the hexed debuff for 6 hands. Duration of effect cannot be increased or decreased. This is an A tier ability. The sit out perk can be combined with Poison Nova, which we'll get to later. Because if someone's sitting out, they obviously fold, and there are some spells that, well, if the opponent folds, they get a debuff. So it can be comboed with some other spells, which is powerful. Also, you can set it up to be able to steal a big blind on a future hand by forcing the player who's going to be in the big blind to sit out. You can set yourself up to get a walk in a shorthanded situation if you make the small blind sit out when you're going to be in the big blind. Just a lot of perks to that forced sit out. And then, of course, the Hex debuff is the most powerful thing in the game, in my opinion, in terms of debuffs. You're leeching 3% of your opponent's health every hand. And with another ability we're going to get to later, you can increase the percent of that effect. Now, it does say that the duration of the effect cannot be increased or decreased, which is, you know, a point against it. But it doesn't say that the damage of the effect cannot be increased or decreased. So the fact that we can still double the effect of the Hex in terms of the total damage and then double it again means you can really run the numbers up with Exorcism, and it's just a beast ability. Not quite an S tier, but because it only targets 1 person, but pretty darn close. Next we have Feed an Army. For the next 12 hands, subtract your hero's leech percentage from any pots you win and divide it evenly among all minions you control. I'm going to put this in D tier because I don't know, generally when it comes to minions, I want to be leeching health from them rather than leeching my own health back to them. If I can give them, you know, an equal amount of some of my health, that's great. But if I have to give some of it up to give them health, doesn't really make sense. I always feel I'm going to be a better poker player than my minions. I'm going to do better things with the chips than they would. So I'd rather keep the chips in my possession than in theirs. If it's one of the only abilities you got, great. It's going to help with the minion base build, but it's going to be lower on my list for sure. Next, we have Feign Death, which is definitely not low on my list. Shelter for 9 hands. The longest shelter buff of any of the shelter buffs in the game. Maybe at the time of viewing, there's been a patch and it's 7 hands. It's still a lot. 3 at the final table cannot be used 1 heads up. So this is going to be an A tier ability, as all shelter abilities are. 9 hands makes you kind of want to make it S tier, but the thing is, sheltering is a defensive tactic. It helps you cash tournaments by not having to post blinds when you're on the bubble. It helps you get deeper into the money by not having to post blinds when you're on the final table and kind of sitting out while other players are battling. But it is not an offensive ability that allows you to, you know, win the tournament or chip up significantly. It's more of a survival based spell. And the things that go into the S tier are the ones that are really going to be the game changers, make the difference, help you take it down kind of thing. So extremely good ability. It's going to be on most of my builds. Shelter is just so beneficial. And 9 hands, how do you go wrong? Generally speaking, because it only lasts for 3 hands on the final table, one of the best times to cast it, if you haven't used it on the bubble, is right before the final table. So you still get the full 9 hands benefit. But if you're like a monster chip leader or something, you may not want to be forced to sit out at the start of the final table, in which case you'd save it for the end. But it's usually getting used mid or late game in my experience. Next, we have an ability that originally I didn't think was that good, and now I realize is one of the best abilities in the game. Flayed Skin, all opponents' debuffs have their duration and effect doubled. S tier. Insta. So you cast Hex, your opponent is losing 3% health per hand. Flayed Skin, make it 6% health per hand. Cast Deal with the Devil, get Flayed Skin back. Cast Flayed Skin again, 12% Hex per hand. And that's not even using a Whetstone, would add 1% to the initial buff. So you can start at 4, cast Hex, they're at 4%. Cast Flayed Skin, get it to 8%. Use Deal with the Devil to get Flayed Skin back. Cast it again, you get 16%. If you happen to be, you know, running a spellbook or blackjack build where you can get abilities back again, you might even get so lucky you can cast it a third time and get it to 32% damage per hand. It's GG's for anyone who can't cleanse debuffs. The other thing that's really beneficial is it also doubles the length, so you can buy more time to get the ability back and cast it again. I've had games where I'm hitting people for 16% Hex for like 50 hands. And if they don't have, you know, a lift curse or cleanse debuffs on them, they just basically have no shot. You can go into the final table of an event as one of the short stacks with a Necro, and if you're able to get people hexed, Flayed Skin, and Flayed Skin again, you're just gonna hex and leech all the chips to yourself. You don't even need to play a hand, and you'll probably find yourself in the money and heads up in no time. So Flayed Skin, absolutely monster spell. Requires some timing and planning to be able to pull it off, but absolutely love it. And my favorite thing about the combo with Deal with the Devil is Deal with the Devil you can cast on the flop, Flayed Skin you can cast on the flop or turn. So you can get Flayed Skin back and then cast it the second time on that same turn you get it back. And it's just lights out for everyone else once that comes into play. Next we have Hex Minions. All minions at your table gain the Hex debuff for 12 hands. I'm going to put this in C tier. Hex is a very good ability, but I don't want to just hex the minions. I want to hex everyone. So I always use mass hex over hex minions. But I guess this is the same as the cleric where you got hallowed halls, which is good for everyone, and then virtue, which is only good for the minions. Hex minions is kind of like a starter mass hex. And if it's all you got, then it's definitely going to be good to use because hex is just so powerful and a great way to start the game. But it's going to be nowhere near as good as mass hex. All right, we got Inferno Pact. Trade your healthiest minion for a demon with 200% average health pool. I'm going to put this one in C tier. It's a minion-based spell, but it's not good enough to go in B tier. If it was trade your weakest minion for a demon with 200% average health, I might throw it in the B tier. But because you're losing your strongest minion, you know, it's just not as great. 200% average health pool is pretty good, and you can definitely use this late game to turn a whatever average minion into a monster minion. The other thing that's cool with this is if you happen to cast this spell when your minion is all in, I'm pretty sure the trigger hits before they get eliminated. So even if they do get stacked, this spell will activate and they'll basically come back into the game with 200% health. So timing of this is important. You need to watch your tables where your minions are to make sure that you cast it appropriately, and also comparing average health to your minion's current health is important to get the most use out of this. But if you're doing a minion based build, this can be very useful late game to just turn one of your minions into an absolute Goliath late game. All right, next we have March of the Undead. Any opponent in the event that loses a showdown to a minion you control in the next 14 hands gains the Hex debuff for 14 hands. I'm gonna put this in C tier. The Hex debuff, super powerful. Someone getting hit for 14 hands, that's a long time to be hexed. A long time to be hexed, which means a lot of health is going to be coming back to you, the overlord, the hero. The problem is minions are really bad at poker, and almost the only time that I see them win showdowns against a half decent player is when it's an all-in situation. And if it's an all-in situation, the other player lost the pot, well, there's no point in hexing them because they probably have no chips left. So the only time I really see this going off is if it's a minion and minion situation, they decide to check it down. Then sometimes it's going to hit. But again, those other minions aren't going to last that long anyway. So while I love the idea of running a minion build and every time someone loses a pot to one of my minions, they get hexed for 14 hands, it just doesn't hit that often. And I've run builds where I have 6 minions and it still just doesn't hit very often. So good in place of not having access to the stronger abilities, but not something that's going to make it on an end game build. Something that will make it onto an endgame build is Mass Hex. Instant S tier. All opponents gain the Hexed debuff for the next cycle. I mean, this is basically, you know, the Necro's best ability. This combination here, the current S tier abilities, is how to win with the Necro 101. Cast Mass Hex, cast Flayed Skin, double the effect, double the damage, double the length, double the effect. Cast Deal with the Devil, get Flayed Skin back, cast it again. You've now done a 4x Hex for 4x the length. These three abilities on their own can get you to heads up in tournaments, no problem. And if your opponents don't have anything to cleanse the debuffs, you can literally win the tournament by just using these three things in combination in that order. Sometimes if I'm going to cast Mass Hex early and not Flayed Skin it, I may use Deal with the Devil to get Mass Hex back. But I generally prefer just going hard with the double Flayed Skin. The one thing to consider, if you're at, say you're at the final two tables and you know the other table has all the heroes and they have all the debuffing abilities. You're at a table with maybe some NPCs or some minions or things that don't have the cleanse debuff. I used to always wait till I was at the final table to, you know, unleash the gauntlet of Mass Hex, Flay, double Flay. But I realized that if I'm going to wait till the end game where people can cleanse it, it's not going to give me the effect that I want. So I'll often take a look at the final two tables and say, well, you know what? These other guys, if I get on the table with them, I'm not going to be able to use it. So I might as well use it now. And so I'll often cast at final two tables, maybe final three tables, and then just make sure I maximize the effect of the Flayed Skin so that I get all that leech going into the final table and have a lot more chips. I've also found that this can work in the Horde. If you find you're on a table with who you see are the bigger stacks in the tournament, that's a really good time to use this combination because your Hex is going to last for as long as those players are in the tournament. It lasts 40, 50 hands if you have some studded equipment. And if you're leeching off people who have, you know, 5, 10 million chips, whereas the other heroes are kind of shorter stack grinded out with 1, 2, 3 million, you're just going to be printing stacks every hand. And that has carried me through the event before. So I used to think you needed to wait till you're at the final table, but I now see that it's more about who is at your table, how many players in the field still have cleanse debuffs available, and you know, how much time do you have? And also there's no downside to casting it early if it's going to last 40 hands, 50 hands. It's really about trying to not hex short stacks and not trying to hex people who can either cleanse it or who are going to bust soon, because that's the only way you lose the benefit of the mass hex. So a lot of stuff about hex, but it is the Necro's bread and butter. Next we have Merc Sight. Opponents choose to either show both hold cards or get hex debuff for 8 hands. Again, this is kind of similar to the Goblin Sapper. It's nice. It's a nice spell. We want to put the hex on people. Getting information is super useful, but we have way easier ways to hex them than them choosing to not show their hold cards. So for that, it's going to be a C tier ability in my books. Next, we have New Recruit. If you control 5 or less minions at the start of an event, create an additional demon minion under your control, Brittle. It's going to be a B tier ability. It's what you would use for a minion build. What I really like about New Recruit over, Angelic Ally, or I think Nature's Ally is the other one, is that you're getting a demon, which is a 4-point character. Gorgon Leash and Stables, they give you 3 points. This is a 4-point minion. This is a very strong minion. So I think of all the free minion abilities, Necros have the best one. And demons can do a lot of damage. So when I'm building a minion-based build that's going to have 6 minions, one of them is going to come from New Recruit, because that's how you can turn something with 10 minion points into 14 minion points. You had a Gorgon Leash, you had a Stables, you got 20 minion points, and that's going to be a pretty powerful build. Next we have Omen. Target player gains the Hex debuff for, I believe it's 6 hands. In case of a showdown loss, they take an additional 25% of the pot in health damage. This can result in elimination. This is going to be B tier for me. I basically look at it as Mass Hex is your best Hex spell. Exorcism is the next best Hex spell. And then Omen is the next best Hex spell. And then you got Merc Sight and the Sapper. The length of the Hex is still 6 hands. And that perk of the extra 25% can really put players on the defense. It's pretty close, man. It could actually maybe make its way to A tier, because unlike Exorcism, Omen, you can extend the length of the debuff. Exorcism is fixed at 6 hands. Omen, if you have studded equipment, you can get this thing to 10, 14 hands right off the jump. Plus the 25% additional health. It's pretty strong. I overlooked this for a while because it's just a rare ability as opposed to an epic or a legendary. But for my minion Hexmaster, or my Necro Hexmaster Hex, which is solely focused on hexing people, it's made it to the list, and I'm very glad it did, because now I have 1, 2, 3 spells I can use to hex people. One that gets the whole table, and another 2 that get specific people. And then you just flayed skin, double it up. You can be hitting multiple people for, as I said, 33% damage on hex. It's insane. Next we have Poison Nova, which is the one I mentioned combines well with Exorcism. Straddle for free. Any opponent folding pre-flop gains the poison debuff for 6 hands. And this one I'm putting at S tier for a couple of reasons. One, it's free chips. A free straddle is worth so much because even as the blinds get bigger, the size of that free straddle gets bigger, and you're basically creating chips out of the ether. You can be sitting there short stack with half a big blind. You cast this, suddenly you have 2.5 big blinds. So that in and of itself is very valuable. You'll find on all my tier list videos that the free straddle abilities are finding themselves in either A tier or S tier, just on those merits alone. Then the fact that if anyone folds, they get the poison debuff for 6 hands makes it even more beneficial. I think that poison is the second best debuff in the game behind Hex, because when people are poisoned, they can only gain health from pots 1. They can't use healing potions. They can't use healing spells. Their Hex is completely nerfed. So it's a counter to Hex, and it's a counter to all those classes that have, healing potions and regenerate this and regenerate that, recover health. You turn that off, and it makes it way easier to knock players out and makes it way harder for them to survive because poison is just so detrimental. So the kind of unfair combo, we might call it, is you cast Exorcism on someone so they're sitting out. Then you cast Poison Nova, because the people who fold and don't call that 2x raise are the ones who get poisoned. Well, if you're sitting out, you can't call a raise. You're obviously going to fold, so you automatically get poisoned. And then you start hitting them with the flayed skin to increase the length and the damage of those debuffs. If you're going to go for that combo, you do need to time it effectively. The sit out is only going to last 3 hands, and you need to be under the gun to cast Poison Nova. But if you can pull it off, it's a nice work of art, and it's definitely going to put your opponents on tilt. That being said, if they have a cleanse debuff spell, which is what we're getting to next, they can turn that all off immediately. So you need to be very specific of who you're targeting, because you don't want to try to execute, the triple threat there, only for them to just cast one ability and all your hard work is completely wasted. It is really fun to pull off though in game. Next we have Remove Curse. Remove any debuffs on you and your minions you have. This is going to be A tier. We just talked about, how detrimental debuffs can be to having an effective strategy. So having a spell that removes the debuffs from you, absolutely essential when you're playing in a tough lineup where your opponents are going to be armed with all of these best abilities. Also the fact that it heals your minions as well, beneficial. There are some anti-debuff spells that only cleanse the hero, and the ones that also cleanse the minions are even more beneficial. Next we have Replenish. Distribute double a pot you win evenly to all minions you control. This one I am going to put in D tier. Again, I don't really often need to give a ton of chips to the minions, and early on, the pots aren't going to be that big. And if you're doing a minion based build, you're probably going to have 5 or 6 minions. So doubling the pot is great, but then you have to divide it by 6 or 5, and it doesn't end up being that many chips. There would be some specific situations where you have a big stack early and you hit another big stack where this could, really beef up your minions. But usually you're going to be able to get that same effect by just casting Blood Oath anyway. So I don't see it coming into play that often, and that's why I'm going to put it here in the D tier. Next we have Time of Madness, another S tier ability. One of my favorites to use is the Necromancer. Basically gives you the ability to run it twice. So burn the board and replace all 5 cards with new ones. If you lose an all-in, you cast Time of Madness, run the board a second time, and the first time doesn't matter. So the great thing about having Time of Madness is you can play more aggressively in all-in situations, knowing that if you lose a flip, you can cast this, right? If you win the flip, you just save it for a future hand. So One of the best abilities the Necro has is Time of Madness, forces opponents to play more defensively because they basically have to win a flip against you twice. And it can allow you to, you know, make a lot more aggressive shoves with hands like Jack 10 suited, or I want to say like King 9 suited. I don't want to say like Ace 5 offsuit, because the time that Time of Madness is not effective is when you're dominated pre-flop. If you get in with Ace 5 against Ace King and you lose that race, you're probably going to lose it again, because you're a 3-to-1 dog. But if you get into a situation where you're 60-40, 55-45, and you get to run it twice potentially, usually you're going to be able to win one of those. So super good ability. I have it on all my Necros, whether it's a minion build or a power build. Time of Madness is always going to be in the mix. Next up, we have Time of Uncertainty. Not as good, but still pretty good. All players discard their hold cards and draw 2 new ones. This is going to be an A tier ability for me. If the hero got to keep their cards, it would be S tier. But the fact that the hero loses their cards too means it's just kind of a straight gamble. You're kind of just going into a 50-50 situation. This is the one where if you were dominated pre-flop, you would want to cast Time of Uncertainty, because odds are you're not going to end up in a worse situation than being dominated. And even sometimes you're going to end up ahead. This is basically giving you a 50-50 chance to have the best hand after casting it, because it's completely random. And then if you combine it with Time of Madness, where you have an extra 50-50 shot to win the all-in, because if you lose it the first time, you can cast Time of Madness and run a second board. You can basically combine these 2 spells to be that about 75% of the time you're going to find a win, because either you're going to win on Time of Uncertainty and just win that flip, and then you have a second chance if not. So it kind of levels the playing field, but I don't really love having to play random cards. I think my poker skills are such that I'm usually going to avoid those situations of being dominated, and I prefer having Hex and all that. But if you just want it to be a pure power Necro where people don't want to call your all-ins ever or mess with you, combining Time of Uncertainty and Time of Madness is a pretty powerful 1-2 punch. Next, we have Vampiric Touch, which this one's close between A and S tier. I think I am going to throw it into S tier. Originally, I put it in A tier because target opponent takes 20% health pool damage. You leech half of that. Leeching 10% health, it's not that much, which is why I was going to put it into A tier. But the thing about Vampiric Touch is you can be all in and then cast this either pre-flop or on the flop, and it lets you leech that health so that you have it the next hand. You can guarantee that you do not get eliminated this hand by casting Vampiric Touch. And if you guarantee you are not going to get eliminated, you give yourself the opportunity to cast Exorcism, to cast Flayed Skin, well, you couldn't cast Poison Nova because it's post-flop. I think Mass Hex is pre-flop ability. But you give yourself the opportunity to cast, you can cast Omen, right? You can cast some more Hex spells that are going to help you get more chips. So Vampiric Touch can be used to ensure your survival in a situation. And then if you have some Hex debuffs running, they can leech and give you more health. So this is really good for kind of like kicking off the survival phase with the Necro. If Hex and these other abilities didn't exist, I would definitely lower it to A tier, because again, stealing 10% of someone's health just isn't going to be that much, even in like the most extreme situations. But because the Necro has Hex and these abilities to just quickly get more chips as long as they're still alive, I'm going to bump Vampiric Touch up to S tier for how it combos with the other spells. And then finally we have Vivify. Take 20% of your health pool and damage, divide by 3, and divide X3 that amount evenly among all minions you control. Basically, this works out to being similar to Blood Oath. I think the difference is Blood Oath, you heal them for 40% of your stack. This one, you lose 20% of your stack, but then you like triple it. So you're kind of like giving away 60% of your stack to your minions. If doing a minion-based build, Blood Oath and Vivify can combine nicely to really crank up the amount of healing on them. I'd rather cast Blood Oath twice because of the extra leech. But to do that, you have to cast Deal with the Devil to get it back, which is going to cost you 30% anyway. So it ends up being pretty neutral. The fact that it doesn't give you the extra leech though, and the fact that it costs you health is why I rank it, all the way down in D. Maybe you could argue it goes in C. but it definitely ranks lower than Blood Oath. And I'm only going to be equipping it if I'm going for a purely minion-based build, which again is preferable to using the 2-man sit and goes rather than the all pros or big field tournaments. And that right there is going to wrap up my tier list for the Necromancer class in Heroes of Hold'em. I hope that you got some solid information from this, and if you have any comments or thoughts about, you know, disagreements or success stories of using some of these spells or using some of these combos that I talked about in the video, feel free to share them in the comments. I always love to hear from you guys. And I hope that this guide will help you build better Necros, get more caches, and ultimately get more wins. Thanks so much for watching the video. This has been Evan Jarvis for Heroes of Hold'em, saying until next time, you know what to do. Take what you learned, go out there, and get stacking. Peace.